The subway doors hissed open, and the tide of commuters surged forward. Amina stood dead center on the platform, a single stationary object in a river of motion. Thousands of feet hammered against the concrete, a rhythmic, deafening roar that drowned out her own breathing. Before we continue, if you love powerful real-life stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and join the channel, none of them acknowledging her space. A businessman, eyes locked on his phone, slammed his shoulder into her side as he pushed toward the exit. The impact spun her half a turn. He did not look back. He did not mutter an apology. He simply kept walking, his stride unbroken, as if he had collided with a piece of furniture rather than a person. Amina steadied herself, her hand gripping the cold metal of a support pillar. The crowd swirled around her, filling the void he had left, effectively erasing her from the path. She was a ghost in the heart of the city. The flickering fluorescent tubes overhead hummed with a low, jagged frequency that seemed to vibrate in her teeth. Amina remained by the pillar, the only soul left on the platform as the last train pulled away into the tunnel. The silence here was not peaceful. It was heavy, pressing against her skin like deep water. She stepped toward the exit, her footsteps echoing against the tiled walls, a lonely sound that betrayed her presence to no one. Outside, the city was a sprawling grid of blinding neon and deep, impenetrable shadows. She looked up at the towering glass structures, their windows reflecting a world she could not touch. Every street corner felt identical, a maze of concrete and steel designed to keep her moving, to keep her searching for a place that did not exist for her. She pulled her arms tight against her sides, not against the wind, but against the sheer scale of the indifference surrounding her. The office building was a tomb of glass and polished marble, silent save for the rhythmic scrape of a stiff bristled brush against the floor. Amina knelt in the center of the lobby, the harsh overhead lights reflecting off the tiles she had already scrubbed to a mirror finish. Her palms were mapped with calluses, the skin thickened and cracked from hours of exposure to industrial detergents. She pushed the brush forward, her shoulders burning with a dull, constant ache that radiated down her spine. Every movement was calculated to minimize the strain, yet the fatigue was a weight she could not set down. She worked 18 hours a day, moving from one floor to the next as the city slept. She didn't look up at the panoramic views of the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She focused only on the grime, the stubborn stains, and the next square foot of floor. Her knees throbbed against the hard surface, and her breath came in short, measured hitches. She stopped for a second to wipe sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a faint streak of dust. There was no one to see the work, no one to acknowledge the effort, only the endless expanse of floor waiting for the next pass. The heavy glass doors of the office building swung shut behind her, sealing away the night. Outside, the morning air was sharp, filled with the rising hum of a city waking up. Amina stood on the sidewalk, a stationary point in a river of rushing people. She watched the commuters surge past, their eyes fixed on screens or distant horizons. She stepped directly into the path of a man in a dark suit, holding her ground to see if he would adjust his stride. He did not. He clipped her shoulder, his pace never faltering, his gaze never shifting to acknowledge her existence. She stumbled, regained her balance, and felt the cold reality settle in her chest. She was a ghost here. She walked through the crowded transit hub, a sea of faces that blurred into a single indifferent mass. Nobody looked at her. Nobody saw the exhaustion in her eyes or the tension in her jaw. She was a phantom, moving through a machine of millions. A person without a name, without a history, and without a voice. She reached the edge of the market district, the noise of the city rising to a frantic pitch around her. She was not a participant in this world. She was merely a witness to its indifference. She pulled her bag tighter, feeling the weight of her own silence. The market district was a sensory assault of shouting vendors, clattering metal, and the smell of raw produce. Amina navigated the narrow aisles, her head low, trying to reach the far exit without drawing notice. She stopped at a stall to check the price of a bag of rice, her fingers barely brushing the plastic packaging. Suddenly, a hand slammed down on the wooden counter, inches from her own. A man leaned over the display, his face reddening as he pointed a finger directly at her. He began to scream, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. He accused her of knocking over a stack of crates near the entrance, a mess she had not even been near. Amina tried to speak, to raise her hands in a gesture of denial, but the man stepped around the counter, closing the distance. She stood frozen, her pulse hammering against her ribs. She gripped the strap of her bag until her knuckles turned white. The shop owner did not stop. He leaned closer, his voice rising to a jagged pitch that drew every eye in the vicinity. He repeated the accusation, louder this time, ensuring the entire block heard his condemnation. Amina felt the heat of the sun on her neck, but it was nothing compared to the cold prickle of dozens of eyes now fixed upon her. A woman in the front row lifted a phone, the screen glowing as she began to record. Then another appeared, then a third. The sound of the market seemed to drop away, replaced by the rhythmic clicking of shutters and the soft, mocking hum of people whispering to their devices. They were not helping, they were capturing. Amina looked left, then right, but the circle of onlookers had tightened, turning the stall into a makeshift stage. The shop owner sensed the audience and puffed his chest, his performance becoming more theatrical, his insults more biting. He gestured to the scattered crates, then to her, inviting the crowd to judge her worth. She felt the weight of every digital lens pointed at her face, documenting her silence as if it were an admission of guilt. She could not move, could not flee, and could not hide. She stood trapped in a cage of glass and steel. The shop owner took a breath, preparing to launch a fresh wave of vitriol at the silent woman before him. He gestured wildly toward the recording phones, feeding off the attention. Then, the rhythm of the crowd shifted. A ripple moved through the onlookers, forcing them to step back and clear a path. A man emerged from the periphery, moving with a deliberate, steady pace that defied the chaotic energy of the scene. He did not look at the cameras or the spectators. His focus was locked entirely on the space between the shop owner and Amina. He was tall, his presence commanding the air around him. As he stepped into the gap, the shop owner faltered, his mouth hanging open for a split second as he registered the newcomer. The man stopped, his posture rigid and his expression entirely devoid of the frantic malice that had defined the last several minutes. The shop owner's finger, previously pointed at Amina's face, wavered and dropped. The surrounding noise of the market seemed to thin out. Min-jun did not wait for the shop owner to regain his composure. He moved with a fluid, singular motion, closing the final few inches of distance between them. His hand rose, steady and deliberate, and settled firmly onto the shop owner's shoulder. The contact was heavy, grounding, and impossible to ignore. The shop owner's frame jerked, a reflexive twitch of surprise, as if the weight of that hand had suddenly anchored him to the pavement. The shouting died in his throat, replaced by a sharp, ragged intake of breath. Min-jun's fingers pressed into the fabric, exerting a controlled, unyielding pressure that demanded stillness. The shop owner tried to shrug the hand away, his muscles tensing for a retort, but the grip held fast. It was not a violent shove. It was a command expressed through touch. The surrounding crowd seemed to lean in, sensing the sudden vacuum of sound. The aggressive energy that had fueled the man's tirade moments ago evaporated, leaving him exposed and visibly diminished under the steady, piercing gaze of the newcomer. He stood frozen, his mouth clamped shut, looking up at the man who had effectively dismantled his authority with a single, calm gesture. The silence stretched, thick and absolute. Min-jun leaned in, his voice dropping to a register that carried only to the man he held. It was not loud, yet it vibrated with a cold, absolute authority that made the surrounding onlookers hold their breath. "Your behavior is beneath this city," he said. The words hung in the humid market air, sharp and precise. He did not raise his tone, yet the shop owner flinched as if struck. The man tried to pull back, his face flushing a deep, mottled red, but Min-jun's hand remained a fixed point of pressure on his shoulder. The shop owner scanned the faces of the crowd, searching for the validation he had enjoyed moments ago, but found only blank, judging stares. The power he had wielded through volume and intimidation had vanished, replaced by the crushing weight of public scrutiny. Min-jun's gaze did not waver, his eyes tracking every flicker of panic in the man's expression. He maintained the hold for another heartbeat, ensuring the message landed with total clarity. Then, with a final, dismissive squeeze, he released his grip. The shop owner stumbled backward, losing his balance for a second before catching himself on a display crate. He looked small, his previous bravado entirely stripped away. The shop owner retreated into the shadows of his stall, his presence fading into the background of the busy market. Min-jun did not watch him go. He turned, his movements deliberate, and shifted his focus entirely to the woman standing in the center of the walkway. Amina felt the air change. For years, she had mastered the art of being invisible, of keeping her chin tucked and her eyes fixed on the pavement. To avoid the sharp edges of the city, she started to look down, her muscles coiled to walk away, but a quiet movement stopped her. Min-jun stepped closer, closing the distance until he stood directly before her. He did not look through her or past her to the crowd behind. He locked his gaze onto hers. It was a physical weight, a steady, unwavering focus that demanded she exist in that space. Amina felt a jolt, a sudden, sharp clarity that cut through the numbness of her daily routine. She tried to pull her eyes away, but his steady expression held her fast. In that silence, the noise of the market seemed to drop away. She was a person, standing in the light, being truly seen by a stranger who refused to look away. The neon signs above the market flickered, casting rhythmic pulses of blue and violet light across the wet pavement. Min-jun did not break the connection, but his hand moved to his side. He withdrew a small, heavy piece of cardstock from his pocket. The movement was slow, measured, and devoid of the frantic energy that usually defined the city streets. He held the card out between his thumb and forefinger. Amina stared at it, her fingers twitching at her sides. She had spent years avoiding the notice of strangers, and the instinct to recoil was a physical ache in her chest. She hesitated, her breath hitching as she looked from the card to his face, searching for the catch, the insult, or the hidden demand. Min-jun offered no ultimatum. He simply waited, his arm extended, his posture relaxed. The silence between them grew, heavy with the potential of what that small object represented. Finally, Amina reached out. Her calloused fingertips brushed against the smooth texture of the card as she took it. The weight of it felt significant, the neon light reflecting in the puddles at their feet. She held the card, and for the first time, the future felt like something she could touch. Amina walked away from the market, her pace erratic. The card was a sharp, rigid presence in her palm, pressing against her skin with every step. She did not look back. She navigated the familiar labyrinth of backstreets, but the city felt different, as if the geometry of the alleys had shifted. She reached her small room, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and stagnant water. She sat on the edge of the cot, the only furniture in the space, and finally opened her hand. The card was stark white against her dark palm, a clean, professional object that did not belong in this environment. She traced the embossed lettering with her thumb, the texture grounding her. This was not just a piece of paper, it was an anchor. The silence of the room, usually a comfort, now felt heavy, charged with the static of an approaching change. She looked at the door, then back at the card. The routine of her life, the scrubbing, the invisibility, the quiet endurance suddenly seemed fragile, ready to shatter. She stood up, paced the narrow floor, and stopped at the window. Outside, the city lights pulsed. She knew then that the quiet life she had built was over. The storm had arrived. The lobby of the architectural firm was a cathedral of glass and polished steel. Amina stood at the base of the tower, looking up until the height made her dizzy. The morning sun reflected off the facade, blindingly bright, a sharp departure from the shadows of her usual route. She pushed through the heavy revolving door. The air inside was climate-controlled, smelling of ozone and expensive coffee. She stopped at the security turnstile, her boots clicking against the marble floor. She looked down at her hands, then at the sleek, minimalist reception desk ahead. A security guard glanced at her, his eyes lingering on the worn fabric of her work gear. She felt the weight of the card in her pocket, a rigid, grounding pressure. She stepped forward, swiped the card, and the gate clicked open. The sound echoed through the cavernous space. She walked toward the elevators, the soles of her shoes leaving faint, dusty marks on the pristine floor. Every step felt like an intrusion, yet she did not stop. She was no longer a ghost in the street. She was a visitor in a world built for people who looked like the architects. She reached the elevator bank and pressed the button, waiting for the doors to slide open. The office door closed with a soft, pressurized hiss, cutting off the hum of the outer floor. Min-jun gestured to a chair, but Amina remained standing, her fingers gripping the strap of her bag. He did not offer pleasantries. Instead, he walked to his desk and slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the polished wood. Amina glanced down. Her breath hitched. Inside were blueprints, the designs for the Lagos waterfront project, the ones she had drafted years ago before everything was stolen. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the familiar ink lines. "I know who you are," Min-jun said, his voice dropping to a low, steady register. "I tracked your work from Nigeria to here. I saw the signatures erased, the names replaced, the theft of your vision." Amina looked up, her eyes searching his face, but found only cold, hard facts. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She had spent years burying the architect she once was to survive. As the cleaner, Min-jun tapped the portfolio. "They didn't just steal your work, Amina. They stole your future. But you are not a ghost." He stood, his shadow falling across the blueprints. "You are the architect, and it is time to reclaim what belongs to you." The room felt smaller, the air charged with the weight of the truth finally spoken aloud. The boardroom doors swung open, revealing a long mahogany table that seemed to stretch for miles. Amina stepped inside, the soft soles of her shoes making no sound against the thick, dark carpet. At the far end, the board members sat in high-backed chairs, their faces illuminated by the harsh glow of overhead spotlights. They stopped talking the moment she crossed the threshold. Their eyes tracked her movement, cold and analytical. Min-jun walked to the head of the table, his stride confident, but he did not look back to help her. She walked toward the empty chair at the very end of the table. Every pair of eyes followed her, calculating, dismissing. She reached the chair and pulled it out. The screech of wood against the floor sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. She sat down, her back straight, her hands resting flat on the polished surface. The air around her felt thin. The silence dragged on, thick and suffocating. A man at the center of the table leaned forward, his gaze flicking toward the door with a sharp, dismissive nod. He did not speak, but the message was clear. She was out of place, an error to be corrected. Amina felt the heat rise in her chest, not from shame, but from a long dormant spark of defiance. She looked at the man, then at the polished wood beneath her palms. She did not look away. Instead, she pushed her chair back. The sound was steady, controlled, lacking the hesitation that had defined her movements for months. She rose, her knees locked, her spine straightened, and she felt the phantom weight of the mop and bucket dissolve into the floorboards. The board members shifted, their expressions flickering from boredom to mild, confused annoyance. She did not apologize. She did not offer a nervous smile or a downward glance. She simply stood, her height commanding the space, her shoulders squared against the collective weight of their skepticism. She stood there, anchored, waiting for the room to acknowledge the person she had become. The air in the boardroom shifted, the tension tightening like a wire pulled to its breaking point. She was no longer a ghost haunting the hallways. She was a presence that refused to be ignored. Amina reached down to the floor where her bag sat. The leather was scuffed and frayed at the edges, a stark contrast to the pristine, glass-topped table. She pulled the bag onto her lap, the weight of it familiar and grounding. Her fingers found the brass latch, and with a soft, metallic click, she opened it. The board members leaned in, their eyes narrowed, expecting perhaps a resume or a list of references. Instead, she pulled out a thick roll of vellum, bound by a simple black cord. She placed it on the mahogany surface. Her hands were steady, the calluses on her fingertips catching slightly on the paper as she began to unfurl the sheets. She smoothed them out, pressing her palms down to flatten the curled edges. The blueprints emerged, layer by layer, revealing complex structural grids, precise load-bearing calculations, and elegant, sweeping curves of a design that defied the rigid architecture of the city outside. The room went deathly quiet. The ink was dark and sharp, the lines drawn with a level of technical mastery that demanded respect. She didn't look up at them. She focused entirely on the paper, ensuring every detail was visible. The blueprints lay exposed, a testament to years of hidden labor and a vision that had survived the shadows. She had finally brought the truth into the light. Amina took a breath, the air in the room feeling thinner, charged with the weight of her words. She pointed to the central axis of the structure, her finger tracing a line that cut through the complexity of the design. At first, her voice was low, a steady hum that barely carried to the back of the room. Then, she spoke of load-bearing ratios and material stress. Her tone shifted. The tremor vanished, replaced by the rhythmic cadence of an expert. A board member interrupted, questioning the foundation's stability, but Amina did not flinch. She tapped the paper, her nail clicking against the vellum. She countered his point with a precise calculation, citing the structural integrity of the steel frame. The man stopped mid-sentence. She continued, her pace quickening, her hands moving with the grace of someone who had built this structure 1,000 times in her mind. She was no longer asking for a chance. She was defining the future of the project. The silence in the boardroom was no longer hostile. It was stunned. A senior director who had spent the last hour checking his watch with bored indifference now sat frozen. He leaned forward, his eyes darting across the intricate geometry of the blueprints. He reached for his pen, but his fingers fumbled, and the instrument clattered onto the hardwood floor. He did not bother to pick it up. Beside him, a woman who had been whispering dismissive comments to her colleagues simply stopped. Her mouth hung slightly open as she traced the structural logic of the central atrium. The air in the room felt heavy, pressurized by the sudden collapse of their assumptions. They looked at Amina, then back at the plans, searching for a flaw that simply did not exist. The arrogance that had defined their posture just moments ago had evaporated. One man rubbed his temples, his face pale, as if the sheer scale of her vision was physically overwhelming. They were not looking at a cleaner anymore. They were looking at a master who had been hiding in plain sight. Every board member shifted in their chairs, their previous dismissal replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. They were no longer judging her. They were waiting for her next word, desperate to understand how they had missed the brilliance standing right in front of them. As the sun dipped low, a shaft of golden light pierced the boardroom windows, washing over the table and illuminating the blueprints. The harsh fluorescent glare of the office was gone, replaced by a warm, amber glow that caught the dust motes dancing in the air. Amina reached out, her hands steady, and smoothed the edges of the final design sheet. Her calloused fingertips, once used only for scrubbing floors, now traced the precise lines of her own creation. She did not rush. She took her time to align the documents, her movements deliberate and calm. The board members watched her, their earlier skepticism replaced by a quiet, growing respect. One director stood up, walked to the window, and pulled the blinds just enough to let the light hit the center of the table. He looked at the designs, then at Amina, and nodded once. It was a silent admission of her expertise. Amina looked up, meeting his gaze without flinching. The ache in her back, the exhaustion of the long shifts, and the invisibility of the past weeks seemed to dissolve in the golden light. She was no longer a ghost. She was the architect, She gathered her pens and closed her portfolio with a soft, final click. The room remained silent, but it was the silence of a team waiting for their leader to speak. Amina stepped out of the boardroom, the weight of the presentation lifting from her shoulders. She walked toward the glass elevator, her reflection catching the soft evening light. She felt the city finally yielding to her presence. Then, she stopped. Near the reception desk, a man stood with his back to her, checking his watch. The movement was sharp, precise, and entirely familiar. It was the same gesture she had seen 1,000 times in a different life. Her breath hitched. The man turned his head slightly, revealing a profile she had spent years trying to forget. She ducked behind a marble pillar, her hands trembling as she clutched her bag. It was not a coincidence. They were in her building. The air in the lobby, once cool and inviting, now felt thin and suffocating. She watched as a second man joined him. The hunt had begun, and the silence she had fought so hard to break was now filled with the sound of her own racing heart. Amina pushed through the revolving doors and into the cool night air of Seoul. She kept her pace brisk, eyes fixed on the subway entrance across the plaza. The city was alive with neon pulses and the rhythmic surge of commuters, a chaotic sea that usually offered anonymity. She glanced over her shoulder, just once. Across the street, standing near a vendor stall, two figures remained perfectly still. They were not waiting for a bus. They were not checking their phones. They were watching the building entrance. Her stomach tightened. She turned the corner, weaving through a group of tourists, and ducked into a narrow alleyway to force a reaction. She waited behind a stack of crates, counting the seconds. A moment later, the same two men appeared at the alley entrance. They did not look lost. They scanned the shadows with calculated efficiency, their eyes sweeping the space where she had just stood. Amina pressed her palm against the rough brick wall, holding her breath until her lungs burned. The indifference of the city around her, the laughter, the music, the traffic, suddenly felt like a cruel irony. She was no longer a ghost by choice. She was a target. She moved deeper into the dark, her mind racing to find a path that led away from the reach of her past. Amina ducked into the fluorescent glare of a 4-hour convenience store, the hum of the refrigerators masking her ragged breathing. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her thumb hovering over the screen. A single notification blinked in the darkness. She tapped it. The message was short, devoid of any sender name, but the content hit her like a physical blow. It listed the exact floor of the architecture firm she had visited that afternoon. Below it, a single line of text appeared. "We know the name you are hiding behind." Her vision blurred, but she forced herself to read the next line. It contained a scan of her original, stolen credentials, the ones she had spent years trying to replace. The men were not just following her. They were dismantling her new identity from the inside out. She looked up, scanning the store windows, expecting to see them. The store clerk glanced at her, but she ignored him, her fingers flying across the screen to delete the thread. It was useless. A second message arrived. She dropped the phone into her bag, her hands shaking, and stepped back out into the night, realizing she had nowhere left to hide. Amina slipped back into the office, the heavy glass door clicking shut behind her. Min-jun was still at his desk, the blue light of his monitors casting sharp angles across his face. He looked up, his gaze locking onto her trembling hands. He stood immediately, crossing the room in 3 long strides. He did not ask if she was all right. He asked what had happened. Amina pulled the phone from her bag, sliding it across the polished mahogany surface. Min-jun read the messages, his jaw tightening. He tapped a sequence on his desk console, locking the office access codes and dimming the exterior lights. The room went quiet. He turned to her, his voice low and devoid of hesitation. "They are not just hunting a ghost," he said, his eyes scanning the blueprints. He reached for his secure line, initiating a series of calls. "Your name stays on these plans. I will ensure they never reach you again." He stepped toward the window, watching the street below. The project was no longer just an architectural endeavor. It was a battleground. Amina stepped out of the office building, the cool night air biting at her skin. She kept her head down, moving quickly toward the subway station, but a line of flashing blue lights blocked the main intersection. A construction crew had cordoned off the street, forcing pedestrians onto a detour. She checked her watch, the minutes ticking away, and turned toward the narrow service road that cut behind the old district. The transition was immediate. The wide, well-lit street vanished, replaced by a corridor of brick and rusted metal. She stepped over a discarded crate, her boots scraping against the uneven pavement. The walls here were high, damp, with condensation, and they seemed to lean inward as she walked. Overhead, the sliver of sky was choked by tangled power lines and hanging laundry. She moved to the center of the path, keeping her distance from the recessed doorways that lined the route. The smell of wet trash and stagnant water grew stronger. Every step echoed against the stone, a rhythmic tapping. She reached the midpoint where the darkness became absolute. The buildings themselves were pressing against her. Amina stopped. She needed to listen. The ambient hum of the city had vanished, leaving only the sound of her own ragged breathing. She waited, counting the seconds. Then, it came. A heavy, deliberate thud against the wet pavement behind her. It was not the random scuffle of a stray animal. It was the measured gait of a person walking with intent. She turned her head, but the darkness was a solid wall, impenetrable and thick. She took a step forward. The sound repeated instantly, a mirror of her own movement. She quickened her pace, her boots striking the stone with sharp, frantic clicks. The footsteps behind her accelerated to match, closing the distance with terrifying precision. She gripped her bag tighter, her knuckles straining. The air in the alley felt thin, difficult to pull into her lungs. She reached a corner, glancing back, but saw only shifting shadows. The rhythm of the pursuit was steady, unhurried, and relentless. She pushed off the wall, her legs burning, and broke into a run. The world blurred into streaks of gray and black. Amina sprinted, her lungs screaming for oxygen. She rounded a sharp bend, her boot catching on a slick patch of moss and discarded plastic. She slammed into the brick wall, the impact jarring her teeth, but she did not stop. She pushed off, her palm scraping against the rough surface, and scrambled forward. Shadows danced across the walls, stretching and twisting as if the alley itself were alive. She glanced back, her eyes wide, searching for a face in the gloom. Nothing but shifting darkness. She ducked under a low-hanging pipe, the metal cold against her shoulder, and plunged deeper into the labyrinth. Every turn led to another dead end or a wall of crates. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stopped for a fraction of a second, pressing her back against a dumpster, trying to silence her own gasping breath. The shadows seemed to pulse, narrowing the path ahead. She was trapped. She stumbled toward a flickering light source at the end of the corridor. Amina stumbled into the small, open space where the flickering light cast long, erratic beams against the brick. She spun around, her chest heaving, searching for a way out. But the path behind her was blocked. Two figures emerged from the gloom, stepping into the pool of light with deliberate, slow movements. She froze. The first man stopped, his gaze locking onto hers with a cold, familiar intensity. Beside him, the second man tilted his head, a thin, sharp smile spreading across his face. These were not strangers. They were the architects of her ruin. The faces she had spent years trying to forget were now standing inches away, illuminated by the dying hum of the overhead bulb. She recognized the way they held their shoulders, the specific, predatory tilt of their heads. They had come all the way from Nigeria. The distance she had traveled, the new life she had built, it all collapsed in the span of a single heartbeat. They were here. The men who had stolen her credentials, the men who had erased her name, were standing in the heart of Seoul. The hunt was over. The taller man took a step forward, his boot scraping against the concrete. He did not raise his voice, but the sound carried clearly in the narrow space. "You think you can hide here," he said. "You think you can build something and call it your own." He gestured to the city skyline visible above the alley walls. The project launches in 3 days. You will be gone by then. Amina pressed her palms against the rough brick behind her, feeling the grit bite into her skin. She did not speak. The second man moved to block the only exit, his presence heavy and deliberate. If you are still in this city when the ribbon is cut, you will regret ever stepping foot on this continent, he added. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. They listed the ways they could dismantle her life, starting with her reputation and ending with her safety. Each word was a calculated strike against her resolve. The threat hung in the damp air, heavy and suffocating. They waited for her to break, their eyes fixed on her face, watching for the first sign of surrender. The silence stretched, thick with the threat of what they would do. Amina felt the cold brick against her spine, but the trembling in her hands began to subside. She looked at the men, not as ghosts from her past, but as obstacles in her present. She pushed herself away from the wall, her feet planting firmly on the uneven ground. Her voice emerged, thin at first, then gaining a steady, jagged edge. "I am not going anywhere," she said. The words echoed off the narrow walls, surprising even her. The taller man narrowed his eyes, his composure fracturing for a split second. Amina did not look away. She felt the pulse in her throat, a rapid rhythm that no longer signaled panic, but a deep, burning resolve. She had spent years running, years hiding in the shadows of the city, but that life ended the moment she stepped into this alley. She took a half step toward them. "You stole my work once," she continued, her tone hardening. "You will not steal my future." The men did not retreat. Instead, they moved in unison, a synchronized shift that turned the alley into a cage. The taller one stepped to her left, while his partner drifted to the right, effectively sealing the path back to the main street. Amina felt the cold brick bite into her shoulder blades as she instinctively backed away, but the wall offered no exit. The space between them collapsed. They were close enough now that she could smell the stale scent of tobacco and the sharp metallic tang of the city rain. The taller man leaned in, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the ground, swallowing the light. He didn't speak, but his presence was a physical weight. The second man tapped his palm against the brick wall just inches from her head, a rhythmic, hollow sound that punctuated the suffocating silence. The music in the background rose, a low, vibrating hum that matched the frantic thrumming of her own heart. She was pinned. They stood motionless, savoring the trap they had constructed, waiting for the exact moment when the pressure would force her to collapse. The lead thief shifted his weight, his eyes locked onto hers with a cold, predatory focus. He did not need to speak to convey his intent. He slowly raised his right hand, fingers curling into a tight, hard fist. The movement was deliberate, a slow-motion arc that sliced through the stagnant air. Amina saw the muscles in his forearm tense, the skin pulling tight over the bone. She did not flinch. She did not look for a way out. Instead, she planted her heels into the grit of the alley floor, bracing her core and tilting her chin upward. She watched his hand rise. The air grew heavy, charged with the static of an impending blow. Her breath hitched, but she held it, locking her gaze onto his. She was a target, yet she refused to play the part of a victim. The man hesitated for a fraction of a second, unsettled by the lack of fear. He drew his hand back further, the knuckles white, the threat absolute. The silence in the alley became deafening, a vacuum where time hung suspended. Amina tightened her jaw, her muscles coiled like springs, ready to absorb the force. The strike was coming, and she was ready to meet it head-on. A sudden impact shattered the stillness. Before the fist could connect, a heavy weight slammed into the man's side, sending him sprawling against the opposite wall. Min-jun had arrived, his momentum carrying him directly into the center of the trap. The second man lunged, but Min-jun caught his wrist, twisting it with a sharp, decisive jerk that forced the attacker to stumble backward. The alley erupted into motion. Amina pushed off the wall, her legs finally finding the strength to move. As the men scrambled to regain their balance, Min-jun stepped between them and her, his stance wide and immovable. He didn't waste time with words. He drove a shoulder into the lead attacker, knocking him into the trash bins with a metallic crash that echoed through the narrow space. The men, realizing the element of surprise was gone and facing a wall of resistance, hesitated. They exchanged a frantic look, then turned and bolted toward the streetlights, their footsteps fading into the distance. Amina stood trembling, the adrenaline beginning to ebb. Min-jun turned, his breathing heavy but controlled, and reached out to steady her. The cage was broken. The alley was empty again, save for the two of them. She looked at him, the weight of the last few months finally beginning to lift. The shadows of the alley receded as they stepped back into the pulse of the city. Weeks of preparation culminated in the grand opening of the new center. Amina stood on the high balcony, the wind pulling at her hair as she looked out over the skyline. Below, the streets were a river of light, and her name was projected in bold letters across the facade of the building she had designed. She felt the cold stone of the railing under her palms, a solid, grounding sensation that anchored her to this moment. Min-jun stood a few paces away, watching the crowd gather. He did not speak, allowing her to claim the space. She took a deep breath, the air crisp and clear, devoid of the dust and grime of her previous life. The skepticism of the board, the threats of the men in the alley, the long nights of invisibility, all of it had been fuel for this singular achievement. She turned to look at the city, no longer a ghost haunting the margins, but a force shaping the horizon. She had survived the silence, and now the city was forced to listen. Her hands were steady, her gaze fixed on the future, and for the first time, she was exactly where she belonged. The city lights flickered like stars brought down to earth, reflecting in the glass of the structure she had brought to life. Amina traced the lines of the steel railing, feeling the vibration of the metropolis beneath her feet. It was no longer a place that pushed her aside. It was a canvas she had finally claimed. Min-jun moved to her side, his presence a steady anchor against the height. He did not need to say anything. The silence between them was no longer heavy or suffocating. It was the quiet of a shared victory. She looked down at the entrance, where people were streaming in to see the work that had been stolen from her, now rightfully returned to her name. The struggle of the past months had carved a new path, and she stood at the center of it. She had walked through the fire, and now she was the one who defined the light. The journey was over, but the future was just beginning. Every step Amina took across the polished floor of the gallery was a testament to the distance she had traveled. The echoes of her past, the shouting in the market, the long hours in the dark, the invisibility of the subway had faded into the background noise of a life reclaimed. She stopped near the center of the hall, her shadow stretching long against the wall, sharp and defined. There were no more ghosts here. She looked toward the entrance, where Min-jun stood, a silent witness to the transformation. Their eyes met, a brief acknowledgement of the battle fought and the name restored. The city outside continued its relentless pace, but for the first time, it moved in rhythm with her. She had not just survived the silence, she had dismantled it, piece by piece. For anyone watching who feels the weight of being ignored, remember that your worth is not defined by the space you are granted, but by the strength you hold when the world looks away. Amina turned back to the window, watching the city pulse with a new, vibrant energy. The story of the cleaner was over. The story of the architect had only just begun. The lights of the city began to dim, but the clarity of the moment remained absolute. Amina stood at the threshold of a new life. The weight of the past finally shed like a discarded skin. Her name, once erased, now stood as a permanent fixture in the skyline. This journey was never merely about architecture. It was about the refusal to be extinguished by the indifference of others. Her persistence proved that even in a city of millions, one person can shift the entire landscape by simply refusing to disappear. As she turned away from the window, the reflection in the glass showed a woman who had reclaimed her own narrative. If this story has resonated with you, if you have ever felt the sting of being overlooked, let this be your reminder. Your voice has power. Your work has value, and your story is still being written. Thank you for walking this path with us. If you found inspiration in Amina's rise, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Join us for more stories that challenge the silence. The city lights flicker below, a vast grid of human lives intersecting in the dark. Amina watches the movement from above, no longer a ghost in the crowd, but a part of the architecture she helped define. The struggle that once threatened to erase her name has become the foundation of her resolve. Every challenge, every moment of silence, and every act of defiance has led to this vantage point. She turns from the glass, her movements deliberate and calm. The path behind her is closed, but the horizon ahead is wide open. For those watching, the resonance of this journey does not end when the screen goes dark. It continues in the choices you make. Carry this resolve into your own life. Let the story of the architect serve as a reminder that visibility is not something you wait for. It is something you claim. Thank you for witnessing this transformation. As the final lights fade, remember that your own narrative is waiting to be built. Stay bold. The silence of the city no longer feels heavy. It is now a canvas waiting for the next design. Amina stands as a testament to the fact that identity is not something given by others, but something forged through persistence. She moved from the shadows of the subway to the heights of the skyline, proving that the only walls that truly matter are the ones we choose to break down. This story concludes, but the lesson of her rise remains etched in the concrete and glass of the world she helped shape. For every person watching who has felt invisible, know that your presence is a force. Your voice, when used with intent, can shift the trajectory of your own life. Do not wait for permission to be seen. Do not wait for an invitation to claim your place. Build your foundation on your own terms, just as she did. The struggle was the forge, and the result is a life reclaimed. Thank you for being part of this journey. Carry this strength forward into your own challenges. Keep your eyes on the horizon, hold your ground, and continue to build your legacy. The story ends here, but your own narrative is just beginning. Stay resilient, stay visible, and keep moving forward. The echoes of the past have finally settled into the bedrock of her new reality. Amina looks out over the skyline, seeing not just steel and glass, but the tangible proof of her own endurance. Every floor she scrubbed, every insult she endured, and every blueprint she kept hidden has culminated in this singular moment of clarity. She is no longer defined by the labels others placed upon her, but by the structures she has brought into existence. This journey has reached its natural conclusion, yet the strength found within these moments is yours to keep. If you have followed her path from the shadows to the light, take this truth with you. Your value is not determined by the circumstances of your arrival. The city continues to move, the lights continue to burn, and the work of building a life of meaning remains before you. The story closes, but the impact of your own potential is only just starting to unfold. Be the architect of your own future. The final chapter of this ascent is written in the stability of the ground beneath her feet. Amina has moved beyond the reach of those who sought to erase her, transforming the debris of a stolen life into the foundation of a new reality. Her story is not merely one of survival, but of the relentless pursuit of one's own truth against the weight of systemic indifference. As the city lights flicker to life below, they illuminate a path that was once obscured by doubt and fear. You have witnessed the transition from silence to command, from the invisible to the undeniable. Take this clarity with you as you navigate your own surroundings. Recognize that the obstacles you face are often the very materials you will use to build your own structure. Your voice is a tool, your persistence is the mortar, and your vision is the blueprint for everything you intend to create. The narrative of her struggle ends here, but the principle of her triumph remains a constant. Trust the process of your own growth. Hold fast to your objectives when the world demands your silence. Keep building, keep climbing, and ensure that your presence is felt in every space you occupy. The narrative arc that began in the cold, crowded corridors of a subway station has found its resolution in the heights of the city she now helps define. Amina stands at the edge of the balcony, the wind carrying the sounds of a metropolis that once looked through her, now shaped by her own hands. This is the finality of reclamation. She did not just reclaim a name, she reclaimed the right to exist on her own terms. As this story fades, consider the weight of the silence you might be keeping in your own life. The barriers that seemed insurmountable were merely temporary obstacles, waiting for the right moment of resolve to be dismantled. You have seen how one person, choosing to see another, can alter the trajectory of a life. Carry that awareness forward. Look for the people standing in the shadows of your own daily routine. Offer the recognition that can change a perspective. The blueprints of your own future are currently in your hands, and the materials are already gathered around you. Do not wait for permission to build. Start where you are, with what you have, and move toward the vision that only you can see. Go forward and claim your space. The story of Amina concludes here, yet the resonance of her journey remains. You have traced the path from the margins of a bustling city to the center of a reclaimed life. This transformation was not a matter of luck, but of sustained, quiet action in the face of absolute erasure. As the final images settle, remember that the most significant changes often begin with the simple decision to refuse invisibility. The world will continue to move, to push, and to ignore, but the power to define your own existence rests entirely within your grasp. If this narrative of resilience has provided you with a new perspective, carry it into the spaces you inhabit tomorrow. The challenges you encounter are not signs to stop. They are the friction required to sharpen your resolve. Continue to observe, continue to act, and continue to build your own structure with the same precision Amina applied to hers. The screen may be darkening, but the momentum you have witnessed is a living thing. Take the lessons of this struggle, apply them to your own objectives, and move forward with the certainty that your presence matters. Your story is still being written, and the next chapter is yours to command. Thank you for walking this path. Keep your vision clear, keep your hands steady, and never stop building. The story of Amina concludes here, yet the resonance of her journey remains. You have traced the path from the margins of a bustling city to the center of a reclaimed life. This transformation was not a matter of luck, but of sustained, quiet action in the face of absolute erasure. As the final images settle, remember that the most significant changes often begin with the simple decision to refuse invisibility. The world will continue to move, to push, and to ignore, but the power to define your own existence rests entirely within your grasp. If this narrative of resilience has provided you with a new perspective, carry it into the spaces you inhabit tomorrow. The challenges you encounter are not signs to stop. They are the friction required to sharpen your resolve. Continue to observe, continue to act, and continue to build your own structure with the same precision Amina applied to hers. Your story is still being written, and the next chapter is yours to command. Thank you for walking this path. Keep your vision clear, and never stop building. Beyond the final frame, the echoes of this journey persist. Amina's reclamation of her name is not just a personal victory. It is a blueprint for anyone currently operating in the shadows of an indifferent world. You have witnessed the transition from silence to recognition, a process that demands relentless internal discipline. As you disconnect from this screen, consider the spaces in your own life where you have remained silent when you should have spoken. The courage to stand firm is not a singular event, but a daily practice of claiming your rightful place. If this video has resonated with your own experiences, ensure you are part of our community by hitting that subscribe button. We continue to curate stories that challenge the status quo and highlight the resilience of the human spirit. Your engagement helps bring these narratives to a wider audience, turning individual struggles into collective inspiration. Do not let the momentum fade with the closing credits. Take the resolve you felt today and translate it into your own work, your own voice, and your own path. The world is waiting for the vision only you can provide. Stay focused, stay persistent, and continue to build your legacy with unwavering intent. Thank you for being part of this journey. We look forward to seeing you in the next one. The final chapter is closed, yet the impact of this journey remains. Amina's story is a testament to the fact that visibility is not something granted by others, but something claimed through relentless action. You have watched a transformation that began in the most overlooked corners of a city and ended in the light of professional recognition. This is the reality of persistence. It turns the impossible into the inevitable. As you move forward, remember that every challenge you face is an opportunity to define your own worth. Do not wait for an invitation to take your place. Build your foundation, sharpen your skills, and let your work speak with a clarity that cannot be ignored. If this narrative has sparked a change in your own perspective, keep that fire alive. Join our community by subscribing and continue to engage with stories that demand more from the world. We are committed to sharing these accounts of resilience, and your participation ensures that these voices reach those who need them most. The screen may be fading, but your own path is just beginning. Take the lessons of this struggle, apply them to your own objectives, and move forward with the absolute certainty that your presence is essential. Thank you for witnessing this transformation. Stay focused, stay bold, and continue to build your own legacy. Amina's journey from the subway crowds to the skyline she helped shape is complete. She proved that the most powerful tool for change is not a loud voice, but the refusal to be erased. She reclaimed her name, her craft, and her future through sheer, unyielding effort. You've seen how one person can dismantle the walls of indifference. Now, the question remains, what will you build? Do not let this story be just another moment in your day. Let it be the catalyst for your own next step. If you found value in this account of resilience, make sure you are subscribed. Your support allows us to continue. The world needs your vision and persistence. Thank you for watching. Stay driven. If you love powerful real-life stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and join the channel.